The following presentation is a production of Ride the Wave Media.
It's the Best Birth Podcast, where we interview experts that elevate you as you prepare your heart and mind to have the best birth.
Each episode will interview professionals so you are prepared for pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Our experts will build your confidence and empower you to trust your intuition throughout your pregnancy.
This audio is taken from videos on YouTube. Watch the entire episodes on YouTube at Birth Made Mindful. You're listening to the Best Birth Podcast. We're so excited for our episode today with our expert, Ambe Bruseke. She is the founder and owner of Biceps After Babies and has so many credentials. Today, she'll walk us through nutrition and exercise during pregnancy and beyond.
Ambe Bruseke is a wife, mom of 4, ages 10 through 17, and a former RN who founded Biceps After Babies because she believes that being a mom doesn't have to mean your fittest days are behind you. What started as a little Instagram account to share her fitness journey online has become a business focused on empowering women to achieve. Her signature coaching program, Macros 101, has helped over 8,700 women use the tool of macro counting to build a nutrition plan that's both effective and enjoyable. Ambe, it is such a privilege to have you.
Thanks, guys. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, thank you for coming on. I found you after my second baby and was really excited just to start implementing some of the deeper thought work and then also the necessary steps to take care of myself and my physical body, and then also how that kind of like played into how we see ourselves with body image and like the mental element to it.
Yeah, so much.
So I would love for you to just give us a little background of what you're doing and how you're doing it. And wow, 8,700 women, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's been quite a wild ride. So let me start and back up and kind of talk a little bit about my own fitness journey and my own pregnancy journey as well. When you read my bio, I have 4 kids, and so I've gone through pregnancy and birth 4 times, and it was a little different for each child because I was kind of in a different stage of my own fitness journey for each of those kids. But one of the things that was always a constant throughout those period of time was that I was doing some sort of exercise. And we'll get into talking about exercise and how passionate I am about helping women to be able to feel confident in their ability and their body to be able to move. I think, we can get into it, but I think for a long time, women have really felt very fragile when it comes to birth. And it's been communicated to us that we're very fragile in this state and we're a very vulnerable population. And you just got to be so careful. And I think the pendulum really swung too far to one side. And we have a whole lot of women who are having a whole lot of issues because they've been told that like we just need to sit in a bubble for the whole 9 months. And so, we can get into talking about that. But a little bit about my story. My very first memory of exercise was when I was about 3 years old, and my mom was a fitness instructor, and she took me to the YMCA, put me in the childcare, and then she went and taught group fitness classes. And I just remember as a very, very young child, there was a window between the group X room and like the childcare room. And I just remember sitting there watching my mom teach fitness classes. My mom had 7 kids and I'm the oldest. And so, as a 3-year-old, I saw her pregnant with number 2, pregnant with number 3, number 4, number 5. I was almost 17 years old when my sister was delivered. And so I really saw my mom throughout all the pregnancies. And one of the things that was consistent was that she always worked out during her pregnancies. So for me, it was very normalized that exercise was an important part of being a mom and taking care of yourself. It was very normalized that she would exercise during pregnancy, and it was very normalized that she lifted weights, which I know is something that is unique to my upbringing. Not a lot of women had that modeled for them. But when I was 14 years old, my mom took me into the YMCA weight room because you had to be 14. So it was like a special, like, you turned 14, now you can go into the weight room. And she walked me around the weight room and she showed me all the dumbbells and she showed me all the machines. And she really normalized working out for me as a female. And I'm really grateful for that because it wasn't ever weird for me to like lift weights or lift up barbell. That was just, don't all women do that? Because that's what I saw my mom doing. So I ended up going to college. I ended up getting married. And my last year of nursing school, actually, I got pregnant with my oldest daughter. And that was a really rough year, going through like sickness and just the changes that happened to your body that I didn't expect as a young 23-year-old. And I graduated with my bachelor's degree in nursing in April and had her in June. So I was like, very pregnant at the end of my nursing school. But, during that time, I still kept moving, and movement was still an important part of what I was doing, but it was more low intensity. I was more walking. I wasn't doing a whole lot of weightlifting at that time. Fast forward to my second pregnancy, that was when I became a group fitness instructor like my mom. And so once I had my daughter, I was like, oh man, I can't really go to the gym anymore. I got to find childcare for her. And it seemed like such a great 2-for-1, whereas like I can get paid to work out and my child gets watched for me while I do it. That seemed like a really great way to go. So I became a group fitness instructor. And so for babies 2, 3, and 4, I was teaching group fitness. And I remember with baby 4, I literally taught a body pump class at 9:30 a.m. and had him at like 1:30 p.m. that afternoon. So like when I say I was teaching and exercising all the way up to my delivery date, like it was literally the day that I gave birth, I was still like teaching fitness classes. So we can dive into any like those specific things that you guys want to go down those paths. But one of the things I'm really passionate about, like I said, is helping women to feel powerful in their bodies and not like pregnancy is happening to you, but that you are in control and it's still your body and you're still able to make empowered, good decisions about how you go through this phase of your life.
Well, you talked about a little bit low impact exercise in pregnancy and then also maybe lifting weights, different types of exercise. What do you recommend for some of us who want to stay healthy during pregnancy, but we might not have that background of weightlifting?
I think there's a couple things here that I would advise anybody who is really wanting to prioritize activity during their pregnancy. The first one is getting a provider who's on board with that. I actually changed providers during one of my pregnancies because my provider was not on board with me working out. And there's, unfortunately, my husband's a physician, so I can kind of speak to a little bit of like the education physicians get. And he's actually an OB/GYN. And some of like the updated education, then sometimes how things lag. Like I said, back in the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s, like I said, pregnant women were really seen as like a fragile group that we really had to be protective of, and we had to pull back and we had to like keep them safe, and we had to just everything low impact. You can go for a walk, but that's about it. And unfortunately for people who were educated during that period of time, a lot of that continued out. And then what happens is you have older physicians teaching younger physicians, and sometimes it just doesn't catch up to the more current research. And so there was some really good research that came out in 2002 that really kind of updated some of the standards in terms of what they were recommending for pregnant women in terms of exercise. That was again reiterated in 2012. But it takes time for that to get filtered in through the medical education. There's pros and cons the way that we have our medical education structured in the U.S. And that's one of the cons is it just takes time for that to be educated or to be updated for providers. And so it takes time for everybody to get on board with the most current recommendations. And I found that one of my providers, I started seeing him and he just he was of the ilk that like women shouldn't be exercising. And I was like, that's not going to work for me. And so I found a new provider who was very supportive of exercise. So I think that's one thing that I want to empower women to do when they're looking for providers. If exercise and movement is really important for you, and you can read all the research that shows why we can and should be exercising, is to make that a priority of finding a provider who's very supportive of that. Found another provider who was totally supportive of me lifting weights. Their recommendation, and obviously you need to talk to your own provider, but their recommendation was whatever you're doing beforehand, you can continue on during pregnancy. However, if there's someone out there who's like, but I wasn't exercising at all during pregnancy, can I start? Absolutely. The key is titration. So what a lot of women try to do is they try to go out, I'm going to go for a 3-mile run. Like that's a terrible idea. Bad idea. Go for a 5-minute run. Go for a 2.5-minute run. Go for a power walk for 5 minutes and then titrate that up over time. There is research to show that you can safely add exercise, but it needs to be done in a titration way, not in a like gung-ho, go, dump it all at once type of way.
I think in pregnancy too, in my own experience, it was like I could take 2 steps forward and then sometimes I would have to take a step back. There was a day that I was really, really active, maybe doing a lot of yard work, lifting, squatting. Then it did feel like, okay, I need to I need to rest and I need to like give my body some time to recover.
Yeah. Yeah. Your recovery may be longer than it was previously. I'm already starting to see that too. I just turned 40 this year. And, by no means am I like old, but I am starting to see that my recovery in my 40s was not the same as my recovery, how fast I could recover in my 20s. And it's the same thing when you are basically taking care of two lives at one time. Your body is being used in other ways a lot of the time and putting energy towards something else. And that may mean you don't have as much energy or reserves to be able to recover. And a lot of people don't really understand that, we talk about weightlifting and how you don't actually build weights by lifting weights, you build weights by recovering from lifting weights. And so if you're not actively recovering and you're not recovering well, you're actually doing yourself a disservice. So that's such a good point of making sure that you're not only doing the exercise, but that you're able to recover from that exercise and really listening to your body and pulling back when it's evident that you've overdone it a little bit is really, really important.
That's such a great reminder to follow our intuition and listen to the cues of our body. Let's kind of paint a picture of this time in our lives. If a woman is preparing to get pregnant, what are some good exercises and nutritious health regimens for that stage?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so ideally, every woman would prepare before getting pregnant, right? Like mentally, emotionally, socially, financially, physically, like all of the things. That isn't always, it doesn't always happen. But ideally, if we can do this preparation ahead of time, we're really setting ourselves up for success. From a physical standpoint, if you can even get to the point of just doing the minimum dose that is recommended by the American College of Exercise Scientists, like only 22% of Americans actually get to that recommendation. So if we can at least even get to that recommendation ahead of pregnancy, that's going to be, you're setting yourself up for success. I think I read a stat that it was like 22% of Americans follow the recommendation and like 13% of pregnant women follow the recommendation. So if we can even start there of getting 30 minutes or more of moderate exercise most days of the week, that's the cutoff of what is recommended and advised. So I would say starting there, right? Can you get to that 30 days of exercise most days of the week is a really great place to start. I'm always a proponent. I think every woman all the time, every stage of life should be lifting weights. It's one of the best things that you can do for your body, whether you're pregnant, whether you're 50, whether you're postmenopausal, like for every single woman, lifting weights is a valuable thing, but especially for my pregnant women, because your body, more is being required of it. You think of the idea of resistance training, essentially carrying around 30 extra pounds is resistance training, right? Like that is, you're requiring more of your body. You're requiring your body to carry a heavier load, and preparing for that and getting ready for that is, you're never going to regret getting strong. And so, yes, getting that 30 minutes or more of moderate exercise, but starting to get at least 2 days a week of resistance training, of lifting weights, and getting that ahead of time before getting pregnant. Get comfortable with that before getting pregnant. And then you're going to be able to continue that throughout your pregnancy. And we can talk as much as you want about nutrition, but the nutritional habits that you have pre-pregnancy are going to be transitioned into the nutritional habits you have during pregnancy and then post-pregnancy. And so can we make sure that we're getting enough protein? Can we make sure that we're having enough diversity of sources? So we're getting whole foods and we're getting a diversification of those whole foods, and, being able to make sure that we're having enough fiber, enough water pre-pregnancy. Again, you're going to continue those habits with you during pregnancy and post-pregnancy.
So amazing. I want to step back and just say, like, you will never regret getting strong.
Yeah, ever. I've never had anybody say, oh my gosh, it's so lame that I can squat 200 pounds. Like, never. It is one of the best things that women can do for their health, for their bodies, for their body composition, and for their mental well-being. There is just something so powerful about feeling strong. Being able to, I get goosebumps, like some of my favorite testimonials from clients. I actually just had one the other day. She messaged in and she was like, oh my gosh, we just like moved a couch that we'd moved into our house like a year ago, and I couldn't even help. Like my husband had to call the neighbor over and help. Well, we wanted to move this couch around, and my husband was getting ready to call the neighbor, and I was like, no, I can do it. I can do it. I've been lifting weights now. And she's like, gosh darn it. I like picked up that couch with him and we like moved it over, and my husband was just like shocked. And she's like, I can do it now. Like, I'm strong enough. And those are the kind of moments where your self-confidence as a woman just skyrockets, right? That had nothing to do with what size pants she wore. It had nothing to do with how visible her abs were. It had everything to do with her confidence in being able to meet whatever life was throwing at her. And so, yeah, you will never, never regret being stronger.
I love that. And before we leave this pre-pregnancy phase, speaking to prenatal vitamins, I know that it's recommended to take them 3 months in advance at least, but ideally up to 6 months. And is that just to fill in the gaps, of course, of nutrition, or what are the extra benefits of prenatal vitamins?
I mean, the real benefit of prenatal is the folate, right? That's the key ingredient that has been shown to reduce neural tube defects. And the reason that they want you taking it so far ahead is just in case you get pregnant at any point. Because we know that taking that folate in the early stages of pregnancy, when that neural tube is developing and that neural tube is actually closing, that helps prevent those neural tube defects. And that happens very early in gestation, which is why we want that. We want to get that on board before we're considering getting pregnant. So folate is really the really well studied, really well linked to neural tube defects that we're really wanting from a prenatal vitamin. In general, like outside of pregnant women, I'm not a huge fan of multivitamins for a couple of reasons. One, there's no testing. There's no FDA testing when it comes to supplements. So not to scare people, but like a company can literally say X, Y, and Z is in a bottle and there's no X, Y, and Z, right? Like there's no testing, there's no oversight, unfortunately, in the supplements industry. And so you got a lot of bad players that are just there to make money, unfortunately. The other thing that I think with multivitamins, well, there's two other things. One is that it almost makes people complacent and feel like they're covered. Like, I don't need to have that apple. I don't need to have the apple. I don't need to eat that celery or that kale or whatever because like I'm taking a multivitamin and I'm covered. And it almost makes people complacent and feeling like they don't need to have the whole foods. And then the third thing that we found is that while I wish it was the case that you could just take a nutrient and put it into somebody's body via a pill and it works the same as eating it through food, it does not. We've seen this with fish oil, especially. There was a real huge push to like have everybody taking fish oil supplements because it reduced cardiac events and it reduced high blood pressure, all of these things. The reason we did that was because we had these studies that were linking people who ate fish with having lower risk of cardiac events. And so we said, oh my gosh, the fish oil is contributing to a lower risk of cardiac events. So if we just put that in a pill and we give it to everybody, we're going to reduce everybody's cardiac events. And so they did that and they found that it didn't. And people had to take a step back and say, well, what's going on? Like we literally took the substance that's in fish and put it in a pill and gave it to people. And the reality is that our bodies are so complex that it doesn't work. It's not the same. Taking a fish oil supplement is not the same as eating fish twice a week. And so while I wish it was as easy as just taking all the nutrition that you need and putting it into multivitamin and giving it to somebody, it just isn't. Our bodies process things differently. So if you want to take a multivitamin, knock yourself out. Like I'm not going to, fine, that's fine, whatever. But don't allow it to prevent you from eating a diet rich in minerals and vitamins, a diverse palette of plant proteins, and plant sources so that we're really covering the gamut in terms of all those micronutrients that our bodies need.
I want to talk a little bit about that diverse diet. So if you have a medical reason to have limitations of certain foods, or if you're choosing to be vegan or vegetarian, how can some of these things play out in our pregnancy if we're limiting the choices that we're making around our food?
Sure. And I do want to differentiate between someone who has some medical condition and based off of a desire for how you want to eat, right? There's nothing wrong with having a desire to want to eat vegan or having a desire to want to eat vegetarian, but that's very different than someone who has celiac disease who literally can't process gluten. So I think it's important to know that during pregnancy, especially when the most important macronutrients that you need to be having is protein, because protein are the building blocks. Amino acids are the building blocks for any tissue, any cell structures that we have in our body. You're literally creating a human. You're literally creating tissue out of thin air. You're creating heart muscle out of thin air. You're creating skin and all these things out of thin air. And the building blocks for that is protein. And so one of the most important things that women who are pregnant want to do, and this again leads into that pre-pregnancy into pregnancy time frame, is making sure you're having enough protein. And for recommendations, I usually recommend clients around that 0.8 grams per pound. So how much ever you weigh, times that by 0.8, and that gives you a rough, good starting place with your protein. Now, you'll hear like bodybuilders and stuff talk about going up to like a 1 gram per protein. If you can do that, fantastic. If you're vegan or vegetarian, that may be more challenging. It's harder to get protein on a vegan or vegetarian diet. So maybe you're pulling that down to 0.6 or 0.7. But the point is paying attention to and making sure that you're getting enough protein so that you're able to do everything that your body is being required during that time frame. If you are vegan or vegetarian, it's gonna need to be more of a focus for you, right? I have a vegetarian daughter, and she recognizes that like she has to be very concerned about and focused on making sure she has protein at every single meal. And there's lots of sources of plant protein, right? So she can get protein from other sources, but it has to be something on her mind to make sure that she's getting enough. So if you're someone who is choosing a vegan or vegetarian diet for whatever reason, that would be the biggest thing to pay attention to, is making sure we're getting enough protein. Plant-based protein tends to be less bioavailable than animal sources of protein, meaning your body, in order to access the protein, our body has to digest it and then absorb it and be able to utilize it. And animal sources of protein tend to be less bioavailable, meaning it's harder for our bodies to break it down. It's harder for our bodies to be able to use it. So 1 gram of animal protein isn't exactly the same as 1 gram of plant protein. And then in addition, plant proteins tend to not universally be complete proteins, meaning our body is able to make some proteins, just synthesize them because we're cool like that. But not all of them. We can't make all of them. And so there are amino acids that are essential, meaning we need to eat them. We have to eat those proteins because our body cannot generate them. And plant proteins tend to be incomplete, meaning they'll have some of those amino acids that we can't generate, but not all of them, whereas animal sources tend to be more complete sources of protein. So you just have to be kind of aware too, if you're doing a plant-based diet, that you're making sure that you're getting enough protein, but that you're having a variety of protein sources. There's a reason that a lot of South American countries eat rice and beans together, because individually those are both incomplete proteins, but when paired together, they overlap, and now you have a complete protein. So if you're someone who, again, wants this type of lifestyle or diet, you just need to educate yourself to know what kinds of foods to eat, how to pair proteins together, how to make sure that you're getting enough so that you are able to do all the things that you need to be able to grow that little human.
And you're an expert in macro counting. Do you recommend this during pregnancy?
So I will say the way that a lot of people teach macro counting is very much as a diet. It's very much as a like, you need to follow this, you need to eat this, and if you don't, well, you should suck it up. Like, just do better, right? And that's very much not the way that I use macro counting. I use it much more as an education tool. And so I think one of the best things that we can do is just get a good insight into what we're eating. And so that's where I like to start clients, is like, let's just get some feedback and information about what you're currently eating. We don't have to change anything, but let's get that insight. So many women are walking around being like, I eat enough protein, but they've never actually tracked it, and they don't actually know how much they're eating. And I would say 85% of the people who come to me are like, I'm probably eating enough protein. It's like, no, actually, you're not when we track it. So I would say using macro counting as a tool just to get information about the foods that you're eating, absolutely, 100%. Like I think everybody should track their macros for at least 2 weeks of their life. You don't have to do it forever, but like we would be so much more informed about our bodies and the food that we're eating if we just took 2 weeks to actually track what we were eating and get informed and just see it on paper. It's so valuable. So macro counting as a tool, absolutely. When we get into like, okay, then where do we set our macros? This is where we get into making sure we're not going into a deficit. Like the goal during pregnancy is not to lose weight unless you are, working with your provider to be able to, some women want to do that, but most women were wanting to at least maintain or gain some weight. And so macro counting can be a really great way to have women feel more in control and be able to gain that weight appropriately so that you are minimizing your risk factors for hypertension, for preeclampsia, for diabetes. It's been shown that keeping within the parameters of weight gain that is recommended helps with, reducing your risk of all of those risk factors. And so macrocanning can really help with that. It can help that make sure that the weight gain is appropriate. Exercise can also be really valuable for that. And it can also help women to, if you're under gaining, to be able to know, okay, I'm eating 2,000 calories and I'm not gaining appropriately. Cool, let's add more food. We need to add more food. So it just gives you knowledge and insight into the foods that you're eating. You're eating food. It just gives you more insight into what food you're eating. And so, I definitely have lots of women in our programs who are counting macros. They're not doing it for weight loss. And most people equate macro counting with weight loss. And I really want to bash that and just say macro counting is just awareness of what you're eating and then being able to adjust it for whatever goals you have. So I counted macros when I was trying to gain weight. I tracked macros when I was trying to get a six pack. I tracked macros when I did a powerlifting competition. So I was trying to fuel my training and get as strong as possible. I use macro counting to do that. It's not only about restriction, it's about just making sure that you're eating properly for the goals that you have set for yourself.
I love this conversation about nutrition and being aware of what we're eating. In pregnancy, as far as exercise, are there specific exercises that are really good for pregnancy? And we talked about maintaining what you're doing before pregnancy, but what specifically is helpful during pregnancy with exercise?
Yeah, so our two big levers when it comes to exercise are cardio and weightlifting, and both of those are very helpful for pregnant women. You think about it, pregnancy is challenging. We already talked about how it almost is resistance training all day long. You're carrying around all this extra weight, this extra, human in front of you. But then you think about delivery, and delivery is very physically requiring, physically taxing. It's like running a marathon. And I think it's so silly that we think we can run marathons without training for them, right? Nobody would ever go out and just be like, I'm just going to run a marathon today. I haven't done any running or training at all. We'd be like, you're crazy. And yet we think that we can go into delivery and birth without having some sort of training. So I kind of think of the exercise during pregnancy as a way that we're training ourselves, training our bodies to be able to handle the intensity of pregnancy and delivery. And so when we're talking in terms of how we're structuring our workouts, making sure that you're having some sort of cardio is really, really beneficial. We've seen that that even that elevation of that heart rate there's been some research that has shown that can decrease a child, your baby's risk of getting diabetes later on in life. Crazy, right? It not only reduces your risk of getting diabetes during pregnancy, but it also impacts that child later on in life. And so definitely having some sort of cardio workout. And I always like to define cardio because people are like, I go for a walk. Is that cardio? That's the biggest question I always get. And the key with cardio is that we want to be paying attention to one of two things, either your heart rate, if you have something that can track your heart rate, or I can talk about what's called the talk test. So if you don't have a tracker, you can still figure this out. But if we are talking about in terms of heart rate, we're wanting to get your heart rate up into what we call a zone 2 range. So if you take, to find your max heart rate, you can do this math with me alongside in your guys' head. If you take 220 minus your age, that is about your max heart rate. So I'm 40, so I take 220 minus 40, my max heart rate is 180. From there, we can split it into zones. So if we're talking 50% to 60% of my max heart rate, that would be my zone 1. 60 to 70% of my max heart rate is going to be my zone 2. That's where we're really aiming to get up into to have it be considered cardio, is into that zone 2. So for some women, going for a walk, especially if you haven't done a lot of exercise, maybe if you're very, very pregnant, you're carrying a lot of this extra weight, a brisk walk outside may get you up into that zone 2. But I know a lot of women, myself included, that if I just go out for a walk around the block, it will not get me up into zone 2. So that's why having that range can be very helpful, because what you're wanting is to get up into the zone 2. That's where we start seeing some metabolic changes. That's where we start seeing the heart rate the heart and the body having to be able to perform more. So we're wanting to get up into that zone 2 at least. If you don't have a heart rate monitor, you have an Apple Watch or a Garmin, you can use what's called the talk test, which is essentially, if I was chatting with somebody, I could talk with them, but if I was on the phone, they would be like, are you working out? They would kind of know, because I would be a little bit out of breath. I could carry on the conversation, but I wouldn't be able to hide from them the fact that I was working out. And that's, if you don't have a heart rate monitor, that's a good test to see, am I in that zone 2? If I can just easily talk, I'm just having this like long conversation, there's no like out of breath, you're probably in like a zone 1. You're probably not up into zone 2. And if you're getting to the point where it's like, and then you can like say a few words, then you have to take a deep breath again, you're probably out of your zone 2. So that talk test can be very helpful in terms of cardio. So getting into at least that zone 2 for cardio is really beneficial during pregnancy. And then we go into weightlifting. Again, weightlifting at least twice a week is the recommendation. So some sort of resistance training twice a week. And I think weightlifting more than cardio has a lot to do with what you were doing pre-pregnancy. I probably wouldn't recommend anybody to go and, deadlift a whole bunch of weight if you were not deadlifting pre-pregnancy. So but we can do a lot of dumbbell work, isolation work, some of those more compound lifts like your deadlift, your squat, your overhead press, your bench maybe is better if you've been doing that ahead of time, but there's still plenty of exercises, dumbbell curls, dumbbell press, overhead extensions, things that we can do that are a little bit lighter weight and still provide very good resistance for the body.
I want to speak just briefly about labor itself. And you talked about your body's going to be so much stronger and able to have a smooth delivery. Are there ever times that you would use exercise as a tool for labor induction or during labor?
Yeah. So I told you my story of my 4th child where I like taught body pump at like 9:30 in the morning. And I could kind of tell that I was like, we might be having a baby sooner rather than later. And so I remember I taught my class and then I got onto the treadmill and like walked on the treadmill. And I remember there were some of my participants who like stayed after and did the class that was after me. And there was like a window in between and they kept like looking at me like they knew like, oh man, something might be happening. She's like on the treadmill, like trying to walk and engage labor. So yeah, walking can be a good way. Physical exercise can be a good way to induce labor if the body is already there, right? We're not going to be able to take the body there. It's not that powerful. So people don't have to get worried that like, oh, maybe I should pull back and exercise during my 3rd trimester because it's going to like send me into labor when I'm not ready. That's not going to happen. It only is that like last little tipping point if you're already almost there. So definitely in those like early stages of labor, exercise can be a great way to like move the body, help the head start to engage, right? Like we're basically trying to work that baby down into the pelvis, and movement can be very helpful with that. Swaying your hips, rolling on a ball, going for a walk, going for a swim, like those types of things can be very helpful. Once you start to get into that like active labor, that 6 centimeters plus, no, most people are not wanting to do very much movement, right? Maybe you're changing positions, but you're not. I was not going for a walk when I was 6 centimeters dilated. So exercise can definitely be helpful, especially in those early stages. Staying active, staying moving. There's a lot of research that shows. Husband and I were just talking about this the other day. He has a friend who his sister is in the hospital right now on bed rest, and we were having a conversation about the double-edged sword that bed rest is. It is one of those things where it makes us feel like we're doing something when we don't have anything else that we can do. But more and more, there's a lot of research coming out that there's a lot of detriments to bed rest. Mentally, physically, you lose mobility, you lose muscle mass, and so anyway, that kind of circling back around to this idea that like we want to be moving as much as possible as long as it feels good and we're progressing and there's no medical contraindications. And then you probably get into those later stages of labor and you probably don't want to go outside anymore. You want to kind of hunker down and do the dang thing.
Okay, and then biceps after babies. Once baby is born and we are recovering ourselves, what exercises should we introduce and how early?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I always recommend my clients, wait till you're physically cleared, that 6-week appointment. There's a couple reasons for that. One is it's a really important time frame that we're really establishing a milk supply for women who are choosing to breastfeed. And making sure that milk comes in, making sure that you get on that schedule, making sure we're not doing anything to mess up that milk supply and doing everything in our power, right? Not all women can breastfeed, but making sure we're doing everything in our power to be able to prioritize that if that's a goal of yours. So holding off on physical exercise until we have that milk supply established. We have that clearance from your provider. We're making sure your pelvic floor is intact. Any episiotomies or tears have been healed up nicely, is really important. Now, that's not to say you can't go out and do a zone 1 walk, right? Like, again, maybe, I think hopefully that's helpful for people of like, going out and doing a zone 1 walk is not the same as getting up into that zone 2 and that zone 3. So it kind of can give you that rule of thumb of like, going out and walking is great. I remember when I had my first baby, my goal was like to get out of the house every day. And some days that was like, I went to the mailbox. But dang it, I got out of the house. And I think that's really important during that, post-baby time when everything is just hard and you're just kind of in a whirlwind, and it's just a little bit about survival at that time. And then, when you get that clearance from your provider and you're feeling up to it, that's the second thing is like, I don't care what your provider says. If you're still feeling like you're recovering, you're still listening to your body and you're just not ready, like, girl, there's no rush. You got all the time in the world. But getting back into that exercise, when you're feeling up to it, when your provider has made that clearance, is really great. I always say, because a lot of women that I deal with or work with have been very active pre-pregnancy, and then they go to like maybe not being quite as active, maybe they're not lifting quite as heavy of weights, and they're always worried about muscle loss during pregnancy. It's really important to know for women who are in that boat that you may lose muscle mass. You likely will lose muscle mass if you're not lifting as heavy as you were previously. However, muscle memory is a very real phenomenon. And so I see this time and time again of like women get back to lifting weights post-pregnancy. 1-2 months later, they're back at where they were pregnancy. The time it takes to be able to get there is much, much slower. So for anybody who's really stressed about losing muscle mass, stressed about losing strength during pregnancy, it does come back after that pregnancy period of time.
I wanted to briefly ask your opinion. I know there's like a lot of hype and craze about some of this like more rapid weight loss, either like pills or shots. Can you speak to the safety of this during pregnancy or postpartum?
Yeah. I actually did a whole podcast episode on my podcast with my husband, who I said is an OBGYN. And so we had a good conversation about Ozempic and Wegovy and Mounjaro and all of these new weight loss medications. So if you're wanting like a deep dive into that, go listen to my podcast episode on it. But, the overarching theme is, well, first of all, nobody during pregnancy should be taking this. Pregnant women are notoriously hard to get into research studies. Because of the way research studies are structured, we have to make sure that there's no possibility of harm or very, very small possibility of harm being done to somebody. And we just can't guarantee that a lot of time with pregnancy. So fortunately and unfortunately, pregnant women are often like the last group of people to be studied for any medication or any treatment, just because it is, you're dealing with now 2 patients instead of just one. And we just don't know. So, absolutely has not been cleared for pregnant women, as many medications haven't, right? And who knows if and when it will be cleared for pregnant women. So if you're in a pregnancy, like absolutely you shouldn't be taking this. Now we get into that postpartum time period. You're not pregnant, hopefully not breastfeeding. My guess is it hasn't been tested in breastfeeding women either, because again, a vulnerable population that has 2 people that are involved. It is that like this is a really good conversation to have with your provider. There are people that this is a miracle drug for, and that it can help reduce their risk of heart attack. It can improve their quality of life. GLP-1s are basically appetite suppressants. So the way that they work is we don't really know exactly how they work, but we think that they work somehow in triggering something in the brain to reduce appetite, increase satiation. And so what people report a lot is that they have a lot less hunger and they have a lot less food chatter, which has been an interesting thing to note is that a lot of these people who take it feel like their whole lives have been just run by food chatter, right? They're always thinking about food. They're always thinking about what they're going to eat next. They're always hungry. They're always like, just always thinking about food. And it's been interesting that one of the side effects that they've seen for people who have gone on these medications is just the reduction in that food chatter, and how between this increased satiation and the reduction in that food chatter, it's just easier to stick to whatever they want to stick with, right? It's easier to eat less food. It's easier to like not snack on things at night. And so they are changing some of those habits, but it makes those habits easier. So I take issue with people who want to demonize this or say that people who take it are taking the easy way out or some crap like that. There is just so many obesity, weight is such a complex topic. We don't understand a whole lot about it. And I think demonizing somebody who in connection with their provider is making a decision that's best for them and their health, who am I to say what you should be doing? So anyway, I think there's a lot of unknowns. I think they're already working on the next phase of GLP-1, and they're working on pills. Like, this is not going anywhere. Hopefully it's going to get better. Hopefully the technology will get better. But, obesity is complex, and anybody who says otherwise doesn't know enough about it. And I think we got to have more research, but what someone makes a decision with their provider about is none of my business.
Well, and I think maybe one of the risks is that a lot of people are making these decisions without their providers. It's becoming much more accessible online and whatnot. And so making the conversation apparent here, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, just take a pause, don't worry about, it's not the right time.
You don't want to be the research study. Like, never. You do not want to be the research study on these types of things, right? Get through the pregnancy, get through the breastfeeding. I know it feels long. But it really is a short blip in your life. I birthed and breastfed 4 of my kids, and yes, it was time, but it was a blip. You will be able to not be breastfeeding at some point. And if you're wanting to talk to your provider about the medications, that's the point to be doing it.
I love the point that you made that regarding postpartum, we're not in a rush. We have time to figure out our new normal and take this body moving forward. What would you have to say to women who have a longer healing journey than they expect after pregnancy? I know for me, it's taken almost 2 years, and I finally feel like I'm healing to a point where I can exercise the way I used to. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I think the best thing that we can do for women who are pregnant is to help them release expectations of what it's supposed to look like. But there is no normal time frame for pregnancy and postpartum. And I think when we talk as if there is, that it leads women to have these expectations that they're going to be able to lose 20 pounds in 5 weeks, and they're going to be able to fit into their postpartum jeans right away, and they're going to feel like themselves, and they're not going to struggle at all with prolapse or anything like that. And we do women a disservice when we have them coming in with expectations. And so I think the more that we can have conversations and share stories like this of it's completely valid that my experience was I was able to get right back to exercising and right back to working out. That was my experience, and it's completely valid. And it's completely valid that you had 2 years that it's taken you to feel like you can get back to exercising. I'm not right. You're not wrong. None of it. Our bodies are different. And the more that we can embrace that of just recognizing my body is doing what it's doing, and it's different than everybody else. I'm not the same as everybody else. My situation is not the same as everybody else. And having some grace for ourselves in that is really, really important, and admittedly very hard, because our society does really like to promote that, oh, you're not back in your postpartum jeans 2 weeks postpartum? What's wrong with you? And it's gosh, man, can we just get out of this idea that I need to get my body back. I need to, post-baby or pre-baby body, or my pre-baby weight, or these jeans, or whatever we get so hung up on. I want to give women grace because there's a big societal push there. But I think the more we can have honest conversations like this and be able to say, hey, if you go in with these expectations that it's going to be easy, or that you're going to just bounce back, maybe it will be. And then you'll be surprised and happy and overjoyed. But then if it's not, then you're not feeling like you're the odd man out, or you're weird, or, what's wrong with my body. I think that belief of I deal with this a lot with women, of coming to me with this belief of my body's broken, or something's wrong with my body, or my body's bad. And I just think that doesn't serve anybody to come with that belief. And so really just embracing where it is that you're at. I know it's easier said than done. Having patience, having grace for yourself. And again, reminding yourself, I know it feels like it's not, but it is. It's just a short blip, right? Even 2 years is just a short blip in your lifespan.
And the journey is not linear.
Yeah. Amen. So much.
Yes, so true.
Well, Amber, we'd love to share resources. Are there any books or other experts that you recommend for us to follow or find with nutrition and exercise?
I mean, my favorite place to go to is the source, right? I with my nursing background, I love to read research articles. I like to stay up on like the latest research. I know not everybody's really excited about like reading peer-reviewed research, but Google Scholar has made it much more accessible. And even if you're just going on Google Scholar and looking at like what you're having questions about, and then clicking it and just reading like the abstract. In the abstract, they tell you like, here's what we're looking at, here's what we did, and here's the conclusion we came to. You don't have to read the whole thing, just the abstract. That is some of the best ways to be able to get some of the more up-to-date literature on topics. I'm always looking for, if you can find like meta-analysis is usually what I'm looking for, because that means that they took a whole bunch of research studies and then reviewed all of them together. So that's my favorite way to look up information. And I think sometimes people are intimidated by that, but go give it a shot. Like, it's actually not as intimidating as you think it is. Go to Google Scholar, put in like weightlifting in pregnancy, and like click on the first couple and read that abstract. And you very quickly can start to really learn what the actual research is saying. Other than that, I always follow people who are referring to the research. I think that that's really important, is like, if people are telling you something and they can't tell you where they got it from, or they can't cite the article, or they can't like direct you to where they're getting their information from, that's always a red flag to me. Girls Gone Strong has a really good research-oriented content that I really appreciate. They have some like prenatal and perinatal stuff that I find is a really good resource for my clients.
Well, I love your nursing background that you bring to this, and just the research is the great place to go. You're right. Go to the source. Every week we share a Mom Squad secret from a woman in our community. So this week it comes from Lisa, and she said, night sweats postpartum are very common. Prepare by getting a waterproof mattress pad. So just all those things with pregnancy that we can look up and research and educate about the things that happen with our bodies. So thank you for adding your insight and expertise to our conversation and our podcast, and for talking with us today.
Thanks so much. It's been really fun.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. We hope you've been elevated and inspired by this week's expert.
Subscribe today so you never miss an episode. And please share our podcast or post on your social media so that other moms and dads-to-be can also have the best birth.
Please note that the information provided is based on the expert's insights and personal experience. It is not intended as medical guidance. Please seek the advice of your medical provider as it applies to your specific condition.